So, it is that time again. That time where I get on the internet and say that this book, beloved by all, New York Times bestseller, is not actually good. I can already smell the comments just from the title alone, and it's gonna get worse as I get through this video. But unfortunately, as is my cross to bear, I just have to spread the truth, my truth. And today, that truth is Immortal Dark is awful. Now, I'm being kind of hyperbolic with my statements here because it does pain me to say this. I was really looking forward to reading this book and I didn't think I would come out of it with these feelings. But as I was going through my script and writing everything and pulling all my notes, I was like, you know what? Actually, this was worse than I thought originally. And I'm just going to preface now that all of these critiques are not coming from a bad place. I don't want to see this author crash and burn. I don't want to see this book review bombed. I just want to see improvement. And the only way we can get there is to first acknowledge what went wrong. So, hello, welcome back. It is a new day, a new sleigh, and a new video where I have something to say. And again, I have to be controversial on the internet. I swear to God, I'm not trying to be. It's just like happening to me. I am truly just along for the ride. So early this September, Immortal Dark was published and it was advertised as a cross between The Cruel Prince and The Ninth House, both of which I have not read. So the only thing I knew about this book was that it was black vampires. And I was like, oh, okay, perfect. Okay, slay. Quite frankly, say less. You didn't need to convince me. I am already here, sat and ready. So I anxiously awaited for this book to hit my library, and then I acquired the audiobook, and upon the first time that I booted it up, I noticed that this audiobook was 17 hours. I was like, oh, this is going to be a commitment. I tend to have issues with that, but I was like, this is going to be a good book. It's from a debut author. I mean, I'm along for the ride. Once again, I'm strapped in. But then, I started listening and I got into it, and very quickly I realized that it was taking me weeks to get through this book. So Immortal Dark is a dark fantasy in which our main character, Adane, is supposed to inherit her family house. Her sister has recently been abducted. She thinks that she's been kidnapped by someone from her family's house. Stay with me. The world building is already going to sound scary and complicated. I will break it down, but just bear with me for a second. So she has to attend this vampire human university called Uxley University. At this university, she has to live alongside her family's Dranig, aka vampire. His name is Susenyos Saget. She believes this person is the person that kidnapped her sister. So her whole motivation throughout the book is to try and get Susenyos to tell her where her sister is. She also has to make sure that he doesn't inherit her family's house, because if he does, bad things will happen. So she's forced to attend this university, pass these classes, and somehow survive living under the same roof as a vampire. From that, it sounds really interesting. It sounds like a lot of promise. To me, it was screaming Vampire Academy, but I don't know. Maybe it was a little bit different for everyone else. This is what it was screaming to me, and I was intrigued. Very quickly after getting into this story, a glaring issue became very apparent, and that was this book is too long. Whenever I don't like a book that is super popular or a lot of people really have good things to say about it, I tend to look at Goodreads just to see if some people had the same, concerns and questions that I did. And if you look at all like the 1 to 2 star ratings on Goodreads, almost all of them say that they could not finish the book. And normally I don't like those kinds of reviews because from my perspective, it's like, well, you can't judge a book if you haven't even read the whole thing. I don't think it's fair to leave that rating if you haven't gotten the whole picture. But getting into this book, I completely understand why so many people didn't finish it. In truth, I only did out of spite. I was like, this book is not gonna best me. You will not add another book to my DNF list. Right now, I only have one. So I have a lot of issues. I actually have a full list of everything that went wrong with this book, and I'm gonna go through that now. I will also be doing a full breakdown of the world building because, quite frankly, I didn't understand a single thing that was going on. Again, I will go into all of that later. I just want to preface that this will be a guide to what Immortal Dark is about, and also what went wrong with the story. Of course, there will be spoilers for Immortal Dark, so if you don't want to know, don't continue the video. Although I will say, at the very least, continue through the world building if you do want to read it, because trust me, you're gonna need someone to break this down for you. I will also preface a trigger warning. There is a trigger warning at the beginning of this book. Of course, unaliving, blood, violence, and generally just a bit of gore, just a tiny bit. More in the book. I will not get into that in this video, but that's for the book. Anyway, if you're sensitive to any of those topics, please protect yourself. Don't feel like you have to go through the video. It's okay. But without further ado, let's get into first the world building. First, going into the species, they have Dranigs. These are the vampires. That's what they call them. They use these words interchangeably, so I'm just going to use vampire. Then there are the Octies. The Octies are a specific species of humans, and this is like Kidan. All of our main characters are Octies. The Octies come from a select 80 families, and these 80 families are the only bloodlines that vampires can feed on. They can't feed on regular people. They have to come from these families. And then, of course, there's regular, degular people. They don't come up in the story, so we're not going to focus on them. The story starts in way back yonder, whatever year this starts. This Merlin type wizard, they call him the last sage, he made a deal with a vampire named Nemesis. This deal was to bind all vampire species. These are called the 3 binds, and they do as follows. The first bind is population control, which means that vampires can't just reproduce willy-nilly. In order to create a new vampire, a current vampire has to give up their life in exchange. In the book, they call this a life exchange. The second bind, as I already mentioned, is that they can only feed on members of these 80 families. Again, they're called Octies. And as an inclusion of this bind, they can only feed on Octies after they take a companionship vow. This vow is the equivalent of like a promise ring, where essentially a vampire will pledge themselves to a specific house, or rather to a specific family, and then a member of that family will be like, okay, yeah, we'll be together forever. We are companions now. And if any of these vampires try to feed on an Octie that has not made a companionship vow, their blood will taste poisonous and their eyes will turn red for 3 days. Because this is very bad, it's against the rules, so it's to be like a visual indicator of like, I broke the law, you know? Then the third bind is essentially that these vampires are nerfed. That being that they had a much bigger skill set. They had a lot of different powers back in the day, but now it's very dull. They can't do the same stuff that they used to. So now you get your like Twilight vampires. So they're just fast, you know, immortal, hot. So the last sage, aka Merlin, made this deal with Nemesis. He's like, I am going to nerf you for all of eternity and all of your descendants. And then Nemesis, in exchange, asked for the last sage and these 80 families to be their companions. There is more that Nemesis asked for in exchange, but it's a spoiler for the book, so I won't go into it right now. Then we get into the Yuxley University lore. It was initially created as a safe haven for both vampires and Octies to coexist. I know, very like bumper sticker coexist kind of vibes. You know how I said that there's 80 families? Yeah, well, there's 12 houses at this university. Why those numbers are different, I don't know. So there are 2 families, aka 2 houses, that founded Yuxley. And these are Adane House and Ferris House. And these 2 families usually make up like the principal, the dean of the university always. The other 10 houses share property borders that outline Yuxley University. The reason they all have to share borders is so that they can uphold what's called a universal law. This universal law prevents any intruders, human or vampire, from entering the campus uninvited. This keeps it safe and away from people that could potentially hurt the inhabitants of Yuxley University. This universal law is essentially magical. Each house can cast a law, which is like essentially a spell, but only one per house that can only take effect in that specific house. These 10 houses that make up the universal law all share that one, so they can't make up any other laws for their house. An example of a law that we get in the book is when Kidan visits Dean Ferris's house, that's like the head of the university, and she makes a law in Ferris' house that any cup that is set down on a table like sticks to the hand of the person that held it or whatever. It's very complicated, but essentially it's just like a magical spell on the house. But these people are not wizards. They don't like shoot out magic. The use of magic in here is very weird. Again, Adane House and Ferris House lie outside this border. They do not share the border with the other 10 houses, so they are kind of OP. They can make whatever law on their house that they want to, but it's hard to do. You can't just like make a law. You have to go through special training. It's a whole thing. And then other miscellaneous lore. In order for the Octies to take up a companionship vow, they have to take a special class called Dranoctie Studies. And that is the class that our main character has to pass in order for her to inherit her family house. There is something called blood courting, which is essentially a vampire orgy. It's when vampires will feast on Octies that have taken a companionship vow from a different house. They're only allowed to do it once a month for whatever reason. The vampires also have a special building on campus that none of the Octies can access without an invitation. And for some reason, they also have a purge day. I cannot make this up. They have the purge in this fucking universe, but only the vampires can participate. The Octies can't participate, otherwise they'd probably die. So that's the world building. If I missed anything, it's because truly I was confused and I gave up. This is the gist. This is what it took me 17 hours to finally figure out and map out, and I gave it to you in like, I don't know, 10 minutes. You're welcome. I think that deserves a like and a subscribe. Personally, I don't know. So now I'm going to get into some of my bigger critiques of this story. Again, spoilers ahead, so if you don't want to know, click off now. The glaring problem with Immortal Dark is that it has so many plots. Truly, it is a sitcom of a novel. Every single chapter introduces a new plot. So the first plot point I'm going to hit is Dranoctie Studies. As I mentioned, our main character has to pass this class in order for her to inherit her house. She wants to inherit her house because if she doesn't, it will go to the family vampire, Susenyos. Kidan and Dean Ferris are worried that if he inherits the house, he will abuse the ability to create his own house law. They don't trust him. They think he's weird. So one of the big kind of parts of the story is this class. This plot is so obscenely long. I swear to God, her attending these classes, taking these tests or whatever, probably takes up about half of the book. And there is a purpose to having it in the story. The whole point of having this class is to show Kidan that it's okay for her to be a little unstable. It's okay for her to have a little bit of bloodlust, because that means that she can be a companion to a vampire, and it helps her realize that her and Susenyos are more alike than they are different. So I understand why it's included in the story, but for just that, I can't rationalize how long it is. So this plot line has I'm gonna say 3.5 kind of like major tests that Kidan has to go through, and they all reference these very obscure like historical events that will probably never ever get mentioned in the sequels to this book. And it's just so that it can be like mysterious, like puzzle solving, clever, quote unquote. So the first test revolves around the story of this dude that essentially sacrifices himself for the sake of his country. The whole point of her learning that story is so that Kidan can identify another character that probably is not strong enough to make it through the class. Why did this need to happen in the story? I don't know. Because at first, Kidan is like, oh no, like, I think we all sing. I think we're all capable of passing this class together. And the teacher's like, are you sure about that? Do you really think that? And she's like, no, I think this bitch will fail. It's literally chapters, full-on chapters that this takes up. The next test is they have to go to a gala in which the students, Octies, have to be gifted an article of clothing from a vampire that may or may not want to take up a companionship vow with them. This one, I wasn't that upset about its inclusion because the drama, the tea that went on during this plot was very good. Essentially, Kidan struggles to get a vampire to want to take a companionship vow with her. Susenyos refuses to help her, but she remembers that she does have something that he gifted her. So when it's her turn to show who's interested in her, she's like, oh yeah, Susenyos, he gave me his fucking teeth, and holds up a bag of his fangs that she ripped out of his mouth like a week ago. And that was good. I liked that. We can keep that. But that's not even like considered one of the main tests. I don't think so. That's like test 1.5. The second test is that she has to analyze a philosophical meditation technique. I'm not kidding. And somehow this like Taoism type meditation philosophy boils down to her figuring out that she needs to ask Susenyos what the worst possible thing he's ever done in his life is. I can't cuss too much because that's a lot for me to edit out. But how did we get from A to B? Truly, it's just that we tried so hard to be like, I don't know, metaphysical, super ultra modern girl. We just tried to get so philosophical and it didn't turn out that way. It just comes across as confusing and disjointed and unorganized. And then the last test is one I referenced when I was going through the world building. They have to find out what Demesis, the main vampire that made that first deal I talked about, what he asked the Octies in return for accepting the 3 binds. That test is the only one that's actually important to the plot. It's just the last one that matters when you're talking about the characters and moving the plot. So Demesis asked for companionship in exchange for the 3 binds. But the only way for humans to fully be able to accompany a vampire is to understand them. And the only way they can is if they kill for pleasure. So we find out that Kidan and her friends passed this class because they each killed someone just because they wanted to. Now, I'm not necessarily mad with that as a reasoning because these are supposed to be morally gray characters. I'm okay with them being kind of insane. But to make up this whole plot, this whole class, just to make this point that a character who is so like, no, I'm a good person, I swear, I don't secretly have an urge to kill people all the time, to tell her that it's okay to be like that because, hey, now she can take up a companionship vow and now she can actually go forward with her plan like she initially wanted to, is such a roundabout way of doing things. Like, it takes so long for her to get there. There's so many scenes where it's Kidan and her friends studying for this class. They're attending the lectures and it takes up so much of the runtime for this book. And it makes it such a drag to read. I don't want to read through people sitting in a library and studying. And it doesn't even feel like Kidan as a main character makes any actual progress or that she's doing anything because she's actually clever. She's just getting really lucky and making a lot of assumptions that are somehow getting her to where she needs to be. Like how the fuck she figured out that she had to ask Susenyos about the worst thing he's ever done to a person from reading about Buddhism. Girl, are you kidding? Don't even get me started on the fact that how she finds out about Susenyos' deepest, darkest secret is from him having to drink blood from her pussy. That point is literally where I was gone. I truly faded into nothing. I was not here for the rest of the story. I get it. People like spice. What a way to integrate it into the plot. The next main problem I have is with the house itself, Adane House. It's essentially the house from Encanto, but if it actually hated everyone living inside, because it's magical. For some reason, it's able to like peer into Kidan's mind and like make her hallucinate like her sister and her aunt and all these people talking to her. So I'm like, is it sentient? Is it magical? How does magic really exist in this world, because they talk about the last sage, and that would then imply to me that witches and wizards at some point existed in this world. And if they no longer do, then how is magic still a part of it? Are all the houses magical? That was very unexplained. I don't know if any of the other houses do what this house does. And there's also a subplot within the subplot that Kidane and Susenyos have to master the house. What that means, I don't know. And it requires Susenyos and Kidane to stand in a room and hallucinate until it becomes unbearable. Like literally, I picture that in my mind as these people just standing in the corner of the room like it sounds so goofy to me. Like they just stand there and what? Trip the whole time? And it never even goes anywhere until literally the last page of this book, because they have to master the house in order to rewrite the house law. And on the very last page, for seemingly no reason at all, Kidane suddenly masters the house. Why? Because she asked nicely. I wish I could make this up. So now I get into Susenyos Saget, our love interest in this story, and also the vampire antagonist. I will say as like a positive of this story is that him as a character really subverts the reader's expectations. When we're reading from like Kidane's point of view, she is so like going in hard on Susenyos, being like, I know you're guilty, like to that point where she's being actually annoying. Like me as the reader, I was like, girl, it's so obviously not him. The fact that you won't let go of this actually makes me angry. But I don't think that's uncommon for a lot of YA books. Whenever we have like a character that's like, I don't know, morally gray or just like very hard-headed and stubborn, this is pretty common with those kinds of characters. So I was not upset. It does subvert expectations because Susenyos is cleared, but not all the way. Like he is still involved in June's disappearance, but he wasn't the one that kidnapped her. So he's like kind of in the middle. And honestly, with this kind of setup, you would immediately think like, oh, he's absolutely absolved of everything. He's probably not guilty of anything. But then he actually kind of is. So I was not expecting that. It was a delightful surprise. I fear that is my first and last good thing about this book. So here is Susenyos' backstory, because this is also incredibly confusing. I was going through and taking my notes, and then every now and then it would be like, very heavy, not actually plot points, and then squeezed in the middle, we learned something about Susenyos. And then I'd have to pause and be like, write that down, write that down. So he used to be a king like a million years ago. I don't know how many years ago, a long time. His country was attacked by vampires. So Susenyos eventually allows himself to be turned into a vampire. You know, can't beat him, join him type of business. He then turns his entire court into vampires. He wanted to share the gift of immortality with everyone. So him and his court were on a quest to break the 3 binds. At some point, Susenyos meets Kidane's parents, who have died at this point in the story. The Adanas are archaeologists, and they found an abandoned site that they believe is where the last sage lived, and they find a relic that they believe the last sage used to create the 3 binds. This is kind of where the timeline gets a little muddy, and I'm like, I don't really know how this all connects with each other, but just bear with me. At some point, Susenyos abandons his court, like he just leaves them. Kidane's parents hide the relic in Adane House. They hide it from Susenyos, but they create the house law. This is the law that they spend most of the book trying to reverse. And this law is that if Susenyos Saget does anything to endanger Adane House, the house will take something of equal value to him. This law makes it so Susenyos has to inhabit Adane House and has to protect the relic against his will, because the thing he values most is his immortality. So if he doesn't protect the relic and if he puts it in danger in any way, the house takes away his immortality. Now that whole plot point sounds fun and interesting, It's actually not. I'll go into it. But back into Susenyos' backstory, at some point, I cannot tell you when or for what reason, Susenyos leaves Adane House. Like he leaves. The spirit of Adane House is like, you have endangered us by leaving. We enact the law. And now Susenyos is mortal in one room of the house, the observatory. Only in this room, when he walks in, he will bleed like a human. He could die in that room if someone kills him. So that's all about him. Again, it takes a full book to learn all of those things. Susenyos' character motivation is a little confusing. It's very confusing because he wants the binds broken, but it's weird because he is also against the Nefrassi, aka his past court. They have created their own society called the Nefrassi, which are supposed to be our antagonists. And yet the antagonist, Susenyos, and the Nefrassi share the same motivation. Tentatively, the only real motivation he has is making sure that the Nefrassi don't get the relics to break the bind. He doesn't want them to have it. But really, he's only loyal to himself. Otherwise, I don't have too many complaints about his character. I mean, he's a love interest. His hateful lust turns into love very quickly, I will say. Not along the lines of insta-love, but we're getting a little close. It was very surprisingly more leaning towards slow burn, which I was okay with. I was fine, whatever. He is morally gray, so he's not a good person by any means. But, you know, he's hot. I'll take it. Really, the problem with Susenyos' character leans more into the other plot of the house law. It's so vague that it is almost paradoxical. This law, as I just mentioned, prevents Susenyos from doing anything that could potentially endanger Adane House. At the end of the book, Kidon gets kidnapped by the Nefrassi, and they're holding the body of their dead friend hostage, and they're, torturing them, all that good stuff, and Kidon just cannot find a way out. Susenyos did not go with her to protect her because he cannot leave Adane House. Kidon calls him while she's with the Nefrassi to ask for help, and he gives her a clue. Not even a clue. I'm being generous. Oh my god, this also bothers me. Throughout the book, they read another book called The Mad Lovers, and the only reason it's referenced, the only reason that is a characteristic that these characters share, that they both read this stupid book, is so that at the end, he can make a reference to this book. Oh my god. It's like so convoluted. I'm actually giving myself a headache thinking about it. In the plot of this book that is not Immortal Dark, it's a different book called The Mad Lovers. It's these two people that are essentially Kidon and Susenyos, and these characters in The Mad Lover have to take in a third person for some reason. I'm being as simple as I can without going into the plot of a make-believe book. So he reminds her that is how the story ends, and she's like, oh my god, that means that I have to take the Nefrassi as companions in my house so that they will give us our dead friend so we can turn him into a vampire. I am getting so worked up, you don't even know. This clue that Susenyos gives to Kidon is enough to enact the house law, and he loses his immortality in the whole house, which sounds really bad. But the author so helpfully reminds us that this law only takes effect in the house. The minute he goes outside, he's fine. He's still a vampire. So it's essentially like a reverse murder house, like from American Horror Story. When you take that into effect, it sounds like such clownery. Like, it's not like he's forced to stay inside the house. And also, I think it's kind of like shooting yourself in the foot, because the worst possible thing has already happened. He lost his immortality in every room of that house. So realistically, the house cannot take anything more from him. So A, why would he stay? B, why would he stay inside the house? Like, he could pledge himself to another house and still keep an eye on everything. Also, what's stopping him from, like, I don't know, sleeping outside, like on the front lawn? If he sleeps on the roof, does this law take effect? Like, it sounds so dramatic and yet so unserious when you really think about it. These are all separate plots, and I'm about to go into another one, and this is the poison plot. At some point in the book, Kidan ingests fake poison. How do you make fake poison? I don't know. But this fake poison makes all the other vampires, including Susenyos, think she's about to die. And the whole reason she takes this poison is so that she can convince Susenyos to give her a life exchange, and therefore she can sneak into the vampires only building. It's a really roundabout way of her trying to sneak into this building and find out extra information about her sister. The whole reason that this plot is introduced is so that she can be introduced to a secret society called the 13. The 13 is essentially a frat of people belonging to the other houses, and their whole goal is that they want to create their own house laws. They don't want to share that universal law, which, yeah, that's important to the story. There's like a greater thing going on there. But the fact that we had to do this whole other plot to get there pisses me off to no degree, especially because it's so incredibly short-lived. Susenyos finds out that she's not actually poisoned very quickly. I'm saying like this whole major plot, quote unquote, takes place over like 5 chapters. So he finds out that she's not poisoned, and then he acts all betrayed. And I'm like, dude, you found out 2 days ago. Did you really have that much time to be upset that this girl you don't even like is about to die, and then she's not actually gonna die? So he finds out, he gets mad at her and kicks her out of Adane House. But then Kidan finds out that one of her friends, Slen is actually behind all of the unalivings that have been happening at the university, including the unaliving of their beloved friend. The only reason she did that was so that Slen could get on the 13's good side, because she wants to become the next head of her house, because her dad is the current head of the house and he's abusive and awful, and she wants to overthrow him. I swear to God, this feels like a cinematic universe. This feels more complex than the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So she finds this out about Slen. Slen is like, hey, you have to testify against Susenyos in court, because right now we're trying to frame him for everything that's been going on. You have to testify against him. And then Kidan is suddenly like, no, I refuse. He did not take my sister. You guys have my sister. Slen hypes this up as like a end of the book kind of reveal, as like a, oh my god, what will happen after this trial, find out in the next book kind of plot. We build up to this trial date, and Kidan takes the stand and she says, no, Susenyos Saget did not take my sister. And then everyone just forgets about the trial. They go back to studying for that fucking class. Slen is only mildly upset that her whole plan disintegrated before her eyes. She's only mildly upset that Kidan did not testify against Susenyos, and in turn got on the bad side of this secret society of people that are not above unaliving children. And they just go back to normal life. I think the book should have ended there. I think it should have been like a, oh no, Kidan didn't do what the 13 said. What's gonna happen to her and Susenyos now? Is he gonna trust her because she technically saved his life? We'll find out in the next book. That is exactly where it should have ended. But no, we still have 25% of the book left to get through. Then there's a whole other plot that takes up the last quarter of the book, and it's still a mess. Introducing the Nefrassi and June. I have already mentioned the Nefrassi as they relate to Susenyos and Kidan, but they are a major plot because we find out that they are actually the big bad of the story. And I will tell you, they get introduced way too late in the story. The first time they are mentioned is in chapter 56. That's almost 75% of the way through the book. That's 75% where they're never mentioned or alluded to. And they are our main antagonists. It's a choice. I don't think it was the good one, but it's a choice. And don't even get me started on the fact that they get revealed on Purge Day. This book had the purge before we saw the end of it. It's too long. It's too long. This video feels too long. So they get mentioned from this character that is introduced and dies within like 3 chapters. No one knows who they are, and Kidan has to piece it all together because she's just so smart, aka everything is handed to her. As I mentioned, the Nefrassi are another name for Susenyos' vampire court, the people that used to follow him and he just up and left. They aren't differentiated from Susenyos very well. I mean, for the most part, we think Susenyos is our antagonist. So their motivations are not like really different from each other. And on top of that, we don't get a lot of stakes as to what will happen if they succeed. The way that they are involved with Adane and the Adane family is as follows. The Nefrassi conspired with this woman called Mama Anouette, and she was the caretaker of Adane and June when they were kids, shortly after their parents died. So they conspired with her to get Adane on board with their mission. But June ended up meeting them first. She went with them willingly. Mind you, up till that point, June is like the scaredy cat, the younger sister. She is terrified of vampires. Adane is always the person to protect her and, ease her fears about their fate, that they're Octies. So June meets our antagonists, the people that are like behind the world ending, and she thinks they're okay. I'm not saying they didn't brainwash her. I'm just saying if you're gonna make them seem awful and yet our golden character, the person that is like the best of us, is on board with their mission, I don't know. I want to hear them out. The author is really trying to describe the Nefrassi as if they're Thanos, but it's coming across as like showing a picture of Thanos to your 80-year-old grandmother who has no idea what an Avenger is. She's like, who is this purple thumb? Get him lotion. She's not intimidated. She's not scared for her life. The Nefrassi don't scare me. I don't understand what about them is so dangerous. This book lacks a lot of stakes. In the grander scheme of the plot of this book, when you're thinking about it as a series, because I think it's supposed to be a trilogy, when you're thinking about it on that greater scale, the stakes are really lacking. She does have moments where she's able to build up tension in these mini subplots, and they work well. Like at the gala when she shows off Susenyos' teeth. Leading up to the trial when we don't know if she's really gonna testify against him. There's a few moments where she's able to really build up that suspense and that tension, but she can't quite get it into like a snowball rolling down the hill. It fizzles out very quickly. It also bothers me because the only reason that Adane and her friends confront the Nefrassi and actually have like a meeting with them is because you're gonna laugh. You're gonna think this is funny. So Adane's friends, Slen and Yusuf, yes, I didn't mention them, she has friends. They unalived another one of their friends named GK because GK knew that Slen and Yusuf had also unalived two other people, and he was thinking about telling the principal on them, and they panicked and stabbed him multiple times. And then Adane was like, no, you're gonna feel bad for what you did. We're gonna go to the store and return him. They're like, we're gonna resurrect him and turn him into a vampire, but we're gonna force the Nefrassi to give up one of their vampires so we can turn him. How do they find them? GPS, apparently. They had their location turned on. It took no effort. They just knew where they were. Found the Nefrassi, confront them, and then she gets into this whole deal with letting them on the campus and taking them as companions in exchange for GK. This feels comical to talk about. The common thread with all the problems in this story is that it feels like there are certain things that need to happen, but the author doesn't know how to get us there. And the only way that we can get there is by creating another plot that just asks more questions than it answers. For example, the purpose of Dranoctie is so that Adane can bond with Susenyos and embrace her murderous side. That's the whole purpose of that entire major plot. But having all of that just to bond these two characters comes at the cost of the story being so obscenely long that people can't even get through it. And then it doesn't even make sense. It doesn't click together in place until literally the end, the very, very end. The purpose of Adane not poisoning herself is so that she can get into these secret vampire circles and learn about the 13. But then the cost is that there's so many questions that brings up. Is no one ever going to mention the fact that she's just not poisoned anymore? No one's going to ask how she got magically cured without being turned into a vampire? Is she going to even remember that she was supposed to be poisoned? Even the purge. The purge had a purpose. It was so that Kidane could find out about the Nefrassi, because no one else knew who they were other than Susenyos, and he wasn't about to tell her. So it was for some random character that died off very quickly to tell her this major plot point, these major characters, and then also so that her and Susenyos could after unaliving people. And the worst crime of that plotline is that you included the purge. And then they killed off this other character who, honestly, he doesn't have like a really big role. And at first I thought he was gonna be like a love triangle type thing. But then he like disappears for like 30% of the story, because he drops out of the class, Dranoctie. He drops out, but then all of a sudden he comes back into the story just so that he could be murdered. But anyway, the whole reason that poor man has to get unalived by his friends is so that they could introduce the Nefrassi, and so that Kidane could realize, hey, the reason we're gonna pass this class is because we like killing for funsies. And of course, so that the Nefrassi could get onto campus and we could be set up for the next story. These are all important things to the story. All these plot points need to happen. Kidane and Susenyos forging their bond, her finding out about how to really make the companionship vow, the Nefrassi. Those are all important things. But we are taking the path of most resistance to get there. If the line from the beginning to the end of the story is supposed to be a straight line, we're taking squiggles. We're doing rainbow road of plots to try and get to the end of the story. At first, I thought that this was just like, oh, it's a romantasy. It focuses more on the romance, the spice, so of course the plot is gonna be lackluster. It's not romantasy, it's dark fantasy. It's YA, mind you, and these people full on, like, have sex. I don't know, call me prude, call me whatever. I have not had people have full on schmecks in a YA book before. When I started the book, I thought it was a romantasy, so I wasn't confident in the world building, but I am supposed to be. This is supposed to be like fully fleshed out world building here. I would argue that the spice in this book makes it teeter on like adult and not YA, which again, that is like purely subjective. That's just like my personal opinion. New adult is also a genre which does have some elements of YA, but is a bit more mature. I just feel like there's so many books out there that do heavily lean into the spice, but still market themselves as YA, because YA is a very dominant genre. It's a very dominant age group in publishing. I really hope it's not like trying to take advantage of a genre that is like just easier to market and is already really popular in order to market your book. I hope that that is not the reason. And I won't say that that is unique to this book or that that's what this author or these publishers were trying to do. That is just like my fear in the background when I read these kinds of books that are supposed to be YA but do contain a lot of spice. I'm just saying we are on a level of down bad and horny that is meant for AO3. And even AO3 would probably have a more cohesive plot. That being said, I do have a pro for this book. The romance between Kidane and Susenyos is not bad. Again, it's built up very gradually, and we do see the different phases of how their affection grows. I think it's really experimental. I have not read a book with these kinds of love interests. It was kind of communicating a little bit to me to gaze upon Wicked Gods, where it's like these two people that are just not good people, but they like each other. Although, of course, in that book, the love interest is a colonizer. This dynamic is more like Harley Quinn and Joker, if Joker wasn't like Joker. Think like Bonnie and Clyde, Light and Misa from Death Note. These are two people that are objectively not good people. They have a lot of bloodlust, but they also like their dynamic really examines the fine line between love and hate. These two people are both equally crazy, and they very frequently fall into either side of love and hate, and I really like it. Of course, that's also knowing that these aren't supposed to be good people. We're not necessarily supposed to like understand every single thing they do or even rationalize every single thing they do. But I do fear that we are setting up for a very confusing and mildly morally questionable love square between Susenyos, Adane, June, and Samson. Samson is one of the Nefrassi dudes that is not blood related, but the brother of Susenyos. I fear we're getting a love square. I'm gonna call it once the next book comes out, but I really want to be proven wrong. I don't want that to happen. I also saw a lot of complaints from people saying that like they hated Adane. They did not like her character at all. And honestly, she didn't like annoy me as much. Of course, her actions and some of the things she does is objectively annoying. But the reason it's so infuriating is because she's acting a certain way, not out of stupidity, but truly out of reckless abandon for her own life. She truly does not care if she lives or dies. She would chew her arm off and eat it if she thought it would put Susenyos in jail. I would love to see that get more developed in a sequel and really like examining her character, because in this book we see her arc of her learning to accept that she is just kind of crazy and kind of has a really high bloodlust. I would love to see more like her internally, like her insecurities, her fears, her worries, that kind of business. I think another problem with Adane's character, and I guess this is not necessarily a problem, but her current character model is that she's incredibly unlikable. She's impulsive, a hypocrite, and she's extremely violent. Making her this way, again, is not bad and it's not uncommon. One of the examples that comes to mind is another vampire, Damon Salvatore from The Vampire Diaries. When he's introduced, you don't like him. Like, he's hot, but you're not supposed to like him. When we meet him, he's unfeeling, cocky, relentless, and he endangers those around him. He's just generally unlikable compared to the other characters that we meet. But what they did in the Vampire Diaries to kind of counteract and make you as the viewer sympathize with Damon was by introducing a character that was even more unlikable. A character that is even worse than he is. And that is Catherine and the Originals. When you unite a cast of characters against a common enemy, it makes you compare the protagonist with the unlikable character, and it makes it easier for you to empathize with them. The most important part of this dynamic is that you see that this unlikable character has something they stand for, and that is essential. It is crucial to give them some kind of motivation. There is a scene in the book when Susenyos bites Adane's neck to see her desires, and he literally says that she has none. She has no motivations. Her only motivation for the whole story was finding her sister June, and then when she finds out that, oh, June wasn't actually kidnapped and she arranged the whole thing, she gets mad at June. She immediately views her sister as the enemy and refuses to see her. So we don't get a greater plan for the layout, like what this character is really trying to achieve, other than getting the Nefrassi out of her house. As of now, the entire cast is unlikable or morally gray. But I think for this to be successful in the next story, they need a common enemy. They already have the Nefrassi, but quite frankly, I think in this first book, their introduction, they did it really tame. They did not make them seem like absolutely horrible like they should have. The Nefrassi need to be a common enemy that is so much worse than any other person that they encounter, so that by comparison, Adane, Susenyos, all these other characters are not even remotely as bad. That is my big brain analysis, my big brain solution. Feel free to take this. I don't expect credit. That's okay. I think this will really spell out a recipe for success for the next book in this series if they really focus on developing the Nefrassi as the villains of our story. And that's even assuming that they're supposed to be the villains. I don't know. A lot of these characters' arcs are actually, they don't arc like a beautiful rainbow. They're more like a downward spiral where they just kind of end up as worse people than they started. It's a very interesting dynamic, and it makes it really hard to like root for any character, and I think that's on purpose, and I think it's done pretty well. And of course, the spicy scenes are spicy. I was definitely covering my ears, checking my AirPods, making sure no one was listening to me when I was reading this book. Overall, I think that the next book needs to be significantly reduced. The first book, I'm so sorry to say, it reads as though it did not go through a single edit. It really seems like we needed someone to sit down, read the book, and come up with all these world building questions to ask the author. Because there are so many like easy questions that I have about how this world works, and it's just so intricate but confusing. This first book could have so easily been 2. That's how long it is. And it really feels like with all these subplots that I'm reading the novelization of a TV show with episodes, hour-long episodes. My book hot take is that I cannot understand why some books are really long. Like, I would not read Sarah J. Maas because she's a Zionist, but also because they are so obscenely long. Once we start getting past 15 hours on the audiobook, I question. I'm like, what are you talking about that needs to be that long? Why couldn't this be a second book? I argue it's probably more beneficial to you to publish a second one. More royalties. I don't know. There's some books that definitely warrant all of that runtime. Legendborn is one of those books. It is extremely long. I did like all of it though. I never felt like there was anything that didn't 100% need to be there. This is a book that I think is obscenely long and doesn't need to be. I think we could have toned down a lot of this like crazy side quests and used that time to really develop the world building. I'm sorry to say it's extremely lackluster. It's not necessarily bad. To me, it screams that this author probably has a lot of passion and has thought extensively about the book that they want to write. And this is a problem that I have too. Like when I'm really excited about something, I get like all up in the clouds and I'm like, I get really excited and then I forget to focus on the fundamentals, the foundation. I really hope that in this next book, in these rounds of edits, that someone is able to like kind of bring it down to the nitty gritty, really focus on the foundation of the story before we start getting all fantastical and whimsical. Overall, I think I'm gonna give this book a 1 out of 5. I really hate to do it. I will acknowledge right now that this is a debut novel. She has one more novel under her belt than I do. She has a whole book deal, a series. Publishing a book is hard. Writing a book is hard. So I won't knock this author too much. Of course, I think that there is a lot of things that need to be developed in this story and future stories. I would have loved to see so much more compacted into less, if that makes sense. But absolutely no hate towards the author. You know, I see the makings of a great story here. I just wish that, and I hope that in the next books they'll be, you know, better developed. I really wanted to like this book. I saw this book literally everywhere. The minute I found out it was about black vampires, I was like, oh, absolutely. This is screaming my name. And yet another disappointment, unfortunately. Now, would I consider continuing with the series? Maybe. And that is only if the audiobook is under 13 hours. If it's longer than the first book, no. No, I'm gonna have to let someone else take that from me. I cannot continue. But yeah, that is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know down in the comments. Have you read this book? Did you like it? Did you kind of have the same feelings as I did? Did you think it was too long? Whatever you feel, let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear from you guys. I know I was laughing, screaming, crying throughout this review, and I was a little harsh, and truly that is just like for entertainment purposes. Really, this is coming from a good place, and I really want to see this author grow and be successful, because compared to some of the other books, like, it wasn't problematic. It was just literally the story. So take my review with a grain of salt. By all means, you read the book, you draw your own conclusions. Feel free to check out Immortal Dark by Tigest Girma. You can follow her on socials. I will include them here. I really do not mean to come across as being hateful or mean. I am simply giving my thoughts. I was getting a little bit worked up, so I will acknowledge that, and I'm sorry. It was a lot, but feel free to let me know your thoughts as always. Be sure to follow me on all my socials at Listen to Kristen on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter. Anyway, that is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know what you think down in the comments, and that is it for tonight. I'm so sad. I thought this was gonna be another addition to my spooky books for Halloween. Now the only thing that scared me is trying to figure out the world building. But anyway, that's the end of the video. So thank you for watching. I am going to go have dinner now and probably go edit this video right away. So thank you.